Thank you so much to everybody that is able to make it to this live event today. I was saying to Kavita before we started recording that this is something that we have waited for a long time. I definitely have waited for this for a very long time. As soon as you started to speak to me about the topic of your research, which is of course what we're going to be speaking about today, and having some insights into what you've been doing for the last few years, which is really, really, really exciting. Um, but I will give a brief introduction to you, and please make sure that you anything that I have missed, okay? So, Kavita is a trainee counseling psychologist, a student at the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling, pursuing the DC Psych degree. She holds a special interest and expertise in deeply exploring and understanding the many facets of self-love alongside the barriers and challenges of self-love, which is also the focus of her doctoral research. Again, like I said, which is what we're going to be learning about today. Kavita is passionate about introducing and bringing to light how Asian philosophy, specifically Indian philosophy, can deepen the understanding of existentialism and decolonize existentialism and counseling psychology. Kavita is also a Bollywood Indian dancer who loves to express herself in creative ways which are deeply rooted and tied to her cultural heritage. And I think something that I'm sure Kavita is going to be speaking about already is exactly that is how this isn't just a theory that we're speaking about love and self-love. This is a lived reality. It's a creative experience, and I wanted to share a little anecdote of something that I've told you before, Kavita, when we last met, about how listening to your passion, listening to your work really transforms um things into reality. It's applied. It makes life real. And uh, so the picture behind me on the screen here is something that people, from time to time they notice. It's a picture of like something inspired, I guess, by the universe, and someone that I love very much in my life hadn't noticed and appreciated the painting, and they're in a moment in life that I felt they did, they need a little bit more self-love as a boost. And so something that I recently made for them, inspired by my little painting, was a mini version of the painting for them to kind of have a little bit of a reminder of self-love. And so the reason that I share that is because it's not just we're not just here today listening to words, to theories, to ideas. Like, these ideas inspire real acts of love within ourselves, acts of loves that we might offer to others that might need that little boost. And so I just thank you so much for, bringing these ideas to me, bringing this focus to my life, and for being so generous and inspiring and passionate about sharing that with others too. I know that you're going to be a little bit wiggly about me being those compliments because you're so humble and so lovely, but it has been the greatest pleasure to share this little part of your journey of self-love with you. Thank you for having me on this, on this ride with you at the research level. And it is really exciting. We were saying that this is going to be the first time that you are actually presenting it live, but not the last. We've already ruined the spoiler from the end. Sorry, I was too excited. Hopefully, this is not the last time that we all meet together today, and learn from you and are inspired alongside you. So I'm gonna stop going on right now. But Kavita, thank you so much. Thank you. And I really look forward to this evening together. So over to you.
Thank you so, so much, Natalie, for giving this beautiful, beautiful space to talk about something that is so important for me on a personal level, and I think for a lot of us. And absolutely love the beautiful painting that you shared. I think that's just so, it's just so wonderful to see, how self-love is, I guess, how it shows up and manifests in so many different ways. And I think some where this passion for me has really come from has been, from The fact that sometimes self-love is often you see it around, you see it spoken about a lot, you see it sometimes on social media, but it doesn't get that kind of depth of understanding that it sometimes perhaps requires, that deeper exploration. Sometimes it still gets misunderstood by so many myths and barriers. And almost breaking them down is like a separate piece of work that it almost keeps that distance between yourself and self-love. So it's about how can we kind of dismantle some of those barriers, but not in a forced or rushed way, but in a very authentic way that still makes space for that element of where sometimes we experience the absence of self-love. So it's like those kind of aspects as well. So just before I begin my doctoral research presentation, I just want to begin by saying that self-love is it's such a deeply personal topic that it is very private and personal as well. So I really want to say that because I feel that I really would love you to all, in this space, in whichever way feels comfortable for you, to really protect yourself in whichever way you feel, is comfortable for you, really take care of your needs throughout this space. If you feel you need a bit of a breather sometimes or something really difficult comes up, feel free to take a bit of a break or, turn the camera off if you need in that moment. Rejoining us when you feel comfortable, because I think sometimes, this is so important as well. And also, more than welcome to share any reflections in the discussion when we do have our discussion. But at the same time, I also say, there's never any pressure to share anything that you're not comfortable sharing in this sort of collective group space. Sometimes that dialogue that you're having with self-love might just be for you internally, and that's absolutely beautiful in itself. So happy for you to just keep that as well. And I just wanted to invite you all really just to just for yourself really just take a few moments, um just take a bit of a breath, just in any way that you feel comfortable to. If you want to close your eyes, you're more than welcome to, or just keeping a soft gaze. And I just want you to become a bit attuned to what's going on for you internally right now, your body, your mind. Just take a few moments to notice. You might be noticing your muscles feel tight, certain areas you might be holding on to certain muscles. Just see if you can allow some space to relax some of those muscles that you don't really need to use right now. Just take a moment to give yourself that space. Noticing your breath as well. Noticing your heartbeat. And as you enter into this space, just want you to really check in with yourself and set yourself a very deeply personal intention for today's session. Today's session's on self-love. Self-love might have, something that you might have been really thinking about, grappling with throughout your life, perhaps. Perhaps you're here just to have a listen in, or, you're all coming with different worldviews and intentions. And I just want you to take a few moments to really see if an intention comes up for you in this moment. This is just for your personal note. And if something doesn't come up, that's absolutely fine too. Absolutely fine. Just sit with that. Sit with that moment. And as you slowly start to come back to the present moment, I want you to, feel free to make a note on your paper or just a mental note. What comes to mind or sensation or emotion when you think or hear self-love? What comes up for you? Just simply noticing it. It doesn't have to be right. It's just your self-love journey. And I'm mindful I'm using this term self-love today, but please feel free to express self-love in any way you wish to. It could be a different term completely. Because remember, this is your self-love journey, and that's all that matters. When you feel ready, I just want you to open your eyes and come back to this space and yeah, just take a few moments, maybe make a note of anything that's come up. I'll just give you just about a minute or so to make a note of anything that's come up. And, feel free to keep this for yourself. It could be a mental note, it could be a note that you've written down. And we can always, you can revisit it at any time you need to, because it belongs to you. So I'm just going to now share my research presentation with you all. And what we'll do after that is we'll have a discussion and really open that dialogue on self-love. So I'm just going to share that now. So this is my doctoral research, which I had really real pleasure to do. Natalie has been on this journey with me. And has been a really important and core part of this whole journey. And I'm very grateful to Natalie's support, to both of my supervisors' support, Professor Simon Duplock and Natalie, for this incredible journey. So my research title reads The Interwoven Threads of Self-Love, Exploring Women's Lived Experiences of Self-Love Within Collectivist Cultures. And it was looking at this from an existential phenomenological lens, which I'll talk about a bit later as well. Some more opening reflections here that I just thought I would just leave you with, just to sort of have a think about. We can always revisit those towards the end and open that discussion towards the end. But yeah, if self-love is to love yourself, then who is the self that you are loving or learning to love? Who is this self that you're directing this love towards and learning to understand? And what does love mean to you personally? Just want you to take a moment, think about that. But we can, don't worry, we will come back to this slide at the end to just, see. But I just wanted to open it up with that. And it's so interesting that so often we hear about how important it is, and we often sometimes might express or tell our loved ones, our family, friends, how much we love them. Um, but it's so interesting when we look at it on the other side, really want to ask that question. But when was the last time that you expressed that you love yourself and deeply felt that love towards and within yourself? What would that look like, even, because maybe it's not something that you've quite thought about. It's just something I want you to think about. I'm just going to leave that there and we'll come back to it towards the end. So just going to start to introduce my topic really, and really talk about where it really stemmed from and the birth of this study, how it really originated. So this study came from both a personal and professional interest for me. Personally, I've had my own journey of self-love. It's gone through various different stages. It's definitely not been a linear process at all. It's a journey that still continues till this day. And I've had my own struggles with it though as well. I've had challenges with it. I've had those difficulties in really knowing, well, what is really self-love, and how do I get there? How do I achieve that? And it's so interesting I use the word achieve, because that's exactly what I used to think about before. It's something that you need to acquire, you need to achieve. And once you get to that self-love, that's it. You've done it. You've cracked the code on self-love. When really what this study and what my later life experiences have really shown me and told me is that this is far from the truth. And that in fact, self-love is a lot more complex than we often realize. And my own personal journey. So I've had quite a few different challenges which have led to my own self-love journey. But one such journey was so when I came to this world, when I was born, very sadly, I was not accepted by my biological dad and his side of the family due to my gender. Um, I mean, also based on the culture as well, come from an Indian Asian cultural background. Um, my dad's side of the family, my dad desperately wanted a boy, you know. So me being born, that was, seen as a huge disappointment, and that led me to being often rejected by him, not really receiving that love from him. Thankfully, my mom, so much love she had to give to me. I'm very, very, very grateful for her. From my dad, unfortunately, I didn't get that. And what that happened, what happened as a result of that was that I almost turned that inwards, and I didn't give myself that love either. I almost rejected parts of myself. So that struggle with, I guess, the lack of love is something that I'm very deeply familiar with, being in that place. And it led to a lot of things, that feeling of not really feeling like I belong in the world, feeling a lot of self-doubt, am I really worthy to be here? And I started to question myself in various different spaces in life. Do I deserve to be in this place? Do I deserve to have this? So all of that, it led to a lot of barriers and challenges for me. But, it was really interesting because having an absent biological father, um, obviously had a lot of challenges and difficulties. But later on in life, my mum met my present dad, who was able to almost repair some of that and really, really teach me the true meaning of um, loving myself. That actually it's a lifelong journey, and it's something that we're constantly learning and grappling with. And that is okay. That is part of the self-love journey. It doesn't always have to be just this perfect, or, well, what is perfect even, but this thing, it can move around. It's fluid. I mean, we as a self, think about it, the self, how many decisions and changes we make in a day or in an hour. Of course, love will move with that as well, and it's absolutely fine for it to do so. So this was my personal journey, from which the study really, has a really personal connection to me. And professionally, I've had a lot of experience of working with this particular subject, or this phenomenon, this self-love, within my clinical work. And it's been really interesting with even in terms of speaking about it with my colleagues, in terms of sometimes the struggles with understanding, well, where is self-love and where are all those other self-related concepts? Because often self-love gets hidden behind all these other concepts that are related, but still different, like self-compassion, self-care, self-esteem, self-worth. So I really realized that there wasn't really much out there in terms of, really thinking deeply about self-love, especially from an existential perspective. So that's what led to this sort of study. And in terms of my literature review, I was mindful that the terms I was using, like self and love, they're already quite huge things and huge concepts in itself. But I was still trying to keep quite focused by using terms such as, self and self-love and loving yourself, and trying not to get them muddled up with related terms like self-esteem or self-compassion. Um, and it was really interesting because it led me to find a range of different research papers on self-love, which all had their own different takes, I guess, on self-love. But something that I noticed very commonly within all the papers that I was finding, or the studies that I was finding, was that there was this real emphasis to define self-love. Let's define self-love, let's categorize self-love as though it could almost be captured into this box. And I thought, but where are those lived experiences? Where are those experiences where, people are grappling with self-love? Where are those studies? And there was really a lack of those studies looking at that lived experience. These were some of the key gaps that I noticed. So yeah, just not having that lived experience. And when I say lived experience, I'm talking about those raw experiences of self-love. And when I say raw, I mean unfiltered, the messy parts, the dark side of self-love, the parts that sometimes doesn't always come to the forefront. Where were those studies? And I also noticed that there was a lot of studies on westernized perspectives on self-love, but not really a lot on non-westernized perspective, which is why I decided to, look at collectivist cultures to try and get a bit more of a much more culturally attuned ideas on self-love. And to my surprise, there were no studies looking at self-love within counseling psychology, which I thought was quite surprising, considering how crucially important this is in individuals' well-beings. And also there was a lack of studies exploring the existential phenomenological lens as well. So this led me to my research aims, which were to really capture and understand the lived experiences of self-love as they are being experienced live in the moment. Really capturing what it's like to love the self. What does that really look like? Not just from a sort of scientific perspective or trying to define it or understanding it from a professional's perspective, which might be through therapists or psychologists, which also has its value, but also wanting to understand the ones, from the individuals that have gone through this. What's it like for you? And to understand this from collectivist cultures. So when I say collectivist cultures, I'm talking about cultures where there is an emphasis on group harmony. There's an emphasis on us or we. And I really wanted to understand, where does self-love exist in this we, in this us? And what might that look like? And is there something else that we need to understand about the self, perhaps, how it might be even seen differently in collectivist cultures? And then to really understand the challenges and barriers to self-love, because again, I was quite surprised that previous studies hadn't really looked at this or explored this enough about, what are those challenges that are facing people that, in order to really explore or access self-love. So these were some of the research aims. And in terms of my methodology, I chose structural existential analysis, which was founded by Amy van Derzen back in 2014. But again, it's been meticulously fine-tuned over a number of years, and it's a very solid methodology, which really gives such a, I would say, such a such a broad and wide perspective on one particular phenomenon. And to explain this SEA, because there are so many elements to SEA, I'm just going to use a metaphor to really try and explain this in terms of how I approached this. So I just want you to imagine photographer, right? Photographer decides to travel to India, decides to travel to Agra to see the Taj Mahal, because it sees value in that place. It sees something in that place. There's something so captivating about the Taj Mahal. It's beautiful. It's got history behind it. It's got so much depth to it. The photographer wants to go themselves. They want to see it for themselves. And they don't just want to see it from one particular angle. They want to see it from different angles. And as you can see here, there are a range of different pictures here of the Taj Mahal. So the place itself hasn't changed. It's a bit like the phenomenon that I've been researching, the self-love. Been looking at it from various different angles, just like these images here. But what these different lenses and angles allow you to do is it allows you to almost zoom in and go into those specific aspects of the Taj Mahal or the self-love, if we're talking about self-love, and to really capture something that wasn't perhaps known from one of the other lenses. So if we look at image 2, we get to see this bird's eye view of the Taj Mahal. We get to see the Yamuna River going, behind it, which wouldn't be possible to see from image 1, for example, which shows, but one shows the archway, the beautiful calligraphy, the Quran scriptures, the detailed patterns on the Taj Mahal. And then we've got image 5 here, which is really interesting. It shows some cracks as well. So it shows those, like in self-love, for example, we're not just looking at self-love from, just tell us about all the times you've loved yourself. No, let's talk about those cracks as well. Let's talk about those times where self-love is a bit challenging and isn't so great. Let's talk about those elements. So that's why I've presented these images here and I guess this metaphor. And it's exactly like this that I took on this research journey, just like this photographer, where I took on these various lenses. So in structural existential analysis, there are some different heuristics. There's 5 heuristics in total. And out of these heuristics, I used these 4 particular heuristics. Now, heuristics are just like I showed you, these lenses. They're a way of looking into an experience, but from particular intentional and specific viewpoints. So we've got the first one here, which is the filter of space, which talks about the 4 dimensions, which basically is about how our life experiences, I guess, exist on the physical dimension, physically in terms of how our body exists, but also in terms of the physical world, socially, how we interact with others, the community, and culturally, personally, which is what's coming up for you personally. This could be through identity, and spiritual as well, what comes up for you spiritually. And you will notice that on this pyramid here, you've got the life and death, you've got love and hate. So these are the different paradoxes and tensions that exist also on all of these levels, which leads me to my next filter, which was looking at the paradoxes and tensions. So it was looking at where self-love is almost, that there are some paradoxes in self-love. Like sometimes self-love is about loving yourself, but maybe sometimes self-love is about actually understanding the absence of self-love as well. So there's those tensions that exist between that. And then understanding the filter of passion, which was about emotions. I really wanted to capture, when we think about self-love, what emotions come up? What kind of emotions are known to self-love? What emotions are not still known? And then we've got the filter of time, which was looking at, how self-love exists in terms of time. I mean, that's crucially important considering self-love is such a continually evolving concept that, yes, it will have an impact in terms of maybe how it was experienced in the past, how is it being considered now, how would it be considered in the future? So these were the lenses that I decided to use in terms of the analysis. And here we've got the 8 steps, detailed 8 steps in terms of structural existential analysis by Natalie Fraser. And I found this guide extremely, extremely valuable and helpful because it really helped to break down SEA for me in a very accessible and easier way. So at the time that I conducted my research, the book that now has been published on SEA, which is really great and very helpful, it hadn't been published at the time. So I was really going off by, there was one paper written by Emmy van Derzen, which was very helpful. And then I had Fraser's paper here, which was very, very helpful and allowed me to really ensure that I was conducting this study and using SEA appropriately as well. So these are some of the 8 steps in detail. So we've got immersion into existential philosophy, really immersing yourself in this philosophy. And reflexivity was a really profound part of my process as well. And I'm very happy to go through some of these in our discussion as well with you all at the end. And here I just wanted to really briefly share the detailed 10 steps in terms of the analysis stage. So as you can see here, it was a very rigorous step-by-step process, but it was very necessary and very needed because each time I looked at the transcripts from different lenses, from the different worlds, it was so fascinating to see all the different things coming up in terms of analysis, but also in terms of my own reflexivity, in terms of what this was bringing up for me personally. So I was making a note of those, my own thoughts, my biases, assumptions, all of those as well as it was actually such a beautiful experience to see how self-love was revealing itself in terms of the incredible transcripts by the wonderful participants in this study. And in terms of ethics and ethical considerations, so my study received ethical approval back in March 2024. Saying that even just feels like I can't believe it's been that long. Time really does go quick. But yeah, ethical considerations as well. So a lot of ethical considerations were taken into consideration because self-love is a topic that is so personally deep, but it can bring up difficult memories, traumatic experiences. It can be painful to talk about. So I was really very much mindful about that to include to ensure that participants felt very safe in the study and that they were given enough information to make those informed decisions to take part in the study, but also engaged in a telephone screening prior to the interview to ensure that they were eligible for the study, but most importantly, that they felt comfortable to take part in the study. So that was very, very important. And of course, the debrief session that followed after the interviews was very, very important to just check in with participants, how that was for them and how they were left feeling, as well as giving them signposting to further support and a debrief form. And in terms of my sample and data collection, so there were 7 participants in total, and all identified as women or female, and identified as having a self-love experience or journey. And this was really left up to the participants to define for themselves. So I just wanted to make that clear. So self-love was conceptualized as loving the self, but how one loved the self was left up to the participants to really fill that gap and decide, because it's such a subjective experience. And I didn't want to bring in my own biases or even use pre-definitions of self-love. I thought that would have really reduced self-love into something which isn't so phenomenological. So it was really left up to the participants to really decide that for themselves. And all the participants identified as belonging to a collectivist culture, and specifically for this study, it was Asian or British Asian cultural background. The advertisement was aged between 25 and 43, but in terms of the actual participants in the study, they were aged between 31 and 43, all living in the UK, but were not required to be born in the UK, and all the interviews were conducted in the English language. And so there were seven semi-structured interviews, all conducted online via Teams. And this data collection period was between about 7 months it took. So just want to move on to the researcher's reflexivity. So basically within research, especially when a researcher like such as myself, I'm an insider outsider researcher. So I have that I guess connection with the participants in terms of belonging to the same demographic, also having that self-love experience. So it was, but also having the outsider positioning as a researcher. So it was really important for me that I was very much aware of my own self-love experience, because as I was doing this study, I was also going through my own self-love journey in itself. So I was having to be extra mindful, I guess, and very much consciously aware of anything that was coming up for me personally that was going on. And to my surprise, I was actually quite surprised, because usually when we think about reflexivity, and especially the way it's taught in training programs, we often hear about, okay, personal therapy or clinical supervision, research supervision, writing, keeping a journal or diary. But it was so fascinating to see how all these other elements of reflexivity that were happening, and they were happening very naturally. So, for example, I've been watching Indian or Bollywood films for such a long time. They've been a real part of my life, but it was so fascinating how I would be sitting down with family, watching a Bollywood film, and I'd think, gosh, that's making me think about self-love, or that's brought up this for me. And I'd have to quickly go and write it down. And it would be just so fascinating to see how self-love was either being portrayed in Bollywood films or it was not being portrayed in Bollywood films. Sometimes the cultural nuances were coming up for me. So there's so much going on for me. And also, other areas in terms of social media. I mean, that is something that is huge in itself. So that was really fascinating to me how, again, I was mindful that there was so much there on social media, but at the same time, I was also wanting to be very much mindful about keeping that process, like still keeping that process a little bit separate so that it didn't just almost become muddled, I guess. So these were some of the various different ways in which I engaged in reflexivity, and I'm more than happy for us to discuss this at the end. But I wanted to share one particular experience that really has stayed with me, and it was very unexpected. So I basically visited the Great Mughals exhibition at Victoria and Albert Museum last year. And I just went because I was genuinely just, I'm very interested. And I thought this is really fascinating to me because it's, also connecting with my heritage and my roots, understanding a little bit about the Mughals. And they were displaying some really beautiful artifacts and a lot of artwork. So I was just going in with that mindset. But it was so fascinating because when I went to that exhibition, I actually ended up going 4 times in total. And it was like, okay, what's going on here? Like I'm going 4 times, and each time I went through this experience, every time I was getting something new, something else was coming up for me. I'm seeing that same artifact, but something different came up for me. I would be looking in this, for example, it had these glass cabinets and it had these artifacts in there. And there was one moment, I'll never forget this, where I was looking at this particular Mughal jade pendant, and I was peering into this glass cabinet. And for a moment, I just saw 3 other spectators that had come to the museum also looking into the same Mughal pendant. And I just thought, wow, they're all looking at this from their own worldviews, their own angles. We're all looking at the same object, but all from our different angles. And it made me think about this whole self-love journey, but also my own research and analysis. And even just the process, the embodied process of physically walking through that exhibition 4 times, it almost translated and made me think, gosh, that's exactly what's happening in this, when I'm doing my analysis. I'm going through it, I'm coming up with new things, new discoveries. And I thought, well, in reality, I could be going through this exhibition forever and forever and forever. And I'm sure so many things would come up. Where is that limit? Where do we draw that limit? So these were some of the realizations I had. And one other really interesting realization I had was I remember when I was just, I was, in the exhibition itself, and I just stopped for a moment and I thought, what if I had a self-love exhibition? What would this exhibition look like? What would I include? What would I not include? And it was so fascinating because immediately about not in what I wouldn't include, I was like, oh, I don't know if I would want the painful parts on display, or, those things. And it was so fascinating because then I thought, gosh, that's so important. That's part of self-love. We need that. Like, that's where sometimes self-love often can stem from. So it was really fascinating because it was making me aware of any biases I was holding, I guess, or any, sort of things any assumptions. So it was just such a wonderful experience. And just wanted to really share that. And I guess I really want to also share that, when, if you're in your journey right now where you might be doing research or even personal research, you're on your journey, life is research in itself. I just want you to be really open to these moments. Sometimes we try and correct things, like even me for a moment, I almost dismissed this whole experience thinking, oh yeah, Kavita, come on now, this is just a museum, relax. It doesn't have anything to do with self-love or your research, but actually it does. And if I hadn't trusted that moment or come home that day and wrote about it or really reflected on it, I might have just easily dismissed this. But this actually allowed me to go back to my transcripts because at that time I was doing my analysis. I went back to the transcripts much more deeply, and it was such a richer experience. I was able to really be aware of these blind spots, I guess. So that's one message I'd love to share with you all. And I want to now present the findings. And just before I present the findings, I just want to say that there were a lot of findings. So I will like to give just an overview of these findings, but more than happy to discuss them in our discussion. So these were the 5 main themes that came up, all pertaining to each of the dimensions. You'll notice a 5th dimension here, which I decided to add, and I'll explain that a little bit later as well. The interwoven dimension. So I'm just now going to present each theme with its sub-themes. So we've got the physical dimension. So this physical dimension was birthing self-love, embodying the intangible in a tangible world. So just like, mothers that bring life to the world, they birth, they physically birth, but also, I guess, emotionally and spiritually birth as well. And this is exactly what this theme was really about. It was talking about how the women in the study were really bringing self-love to life. It was either through the body and appearance. So we've got Jahanara, one of the participants, that was really talking about the importance of taking care of her hair, taking care of her body and appearance, whether that was through makeup. That was her sense of expressing self-love. For Sabah, it was going on self dates. So we've got doing with the self, this aspect of having that time to do these, I guess, acts of self-love, these behavioral acts that we sometimes do. It could either be going to the cinema, it could be either going to different places. But as you see here in this quote by Sabah, she mentioned that people were quite surprised to hear that she used to go to these places on her own. So I guess sometimes it shows those sometimes what could potentially become barriers as well, that when people don't quite understand your choices or the things that you're being driven to do. And I think that's why I mentioned at the beginning of this talk that self-love, remember, this is your journey. It just needs to make sense to you. But of course, we're living in a social world, so sometimes things do it can be very difficult to fully express. And then we've got the Vardavaran of self-love. Now, Vardavaran is a Sanskrit term which means atmosphere, environment, but it goes a bit beyond that. It has a bit of a spiritual element to it. So it basically talks about how certain places hold almost those environments to I guess, do particular things. So, for example, it was really interesting with Saraswati. She reflected that she noticed that whenever she thought about loving herself or doing things for herself, she couldn't quite do it in the home because she felt that her home was deeply attached to, her cultural roles, her roles as a mother, as a wife. Um, and that felt very, very difficult for her. So it was very fascinating how she felt that anytime she was away from the home, that's when she felt she could engage in self-love in a physical way. But it's interesting how later down the line that actually changed as well. So there was a point when she said, her children grew up and she was able to actually then have and feel self-love in the home. So it's just, this is again that paradox sometimes between how certain things can be possible at one particular time. Again, time comes in here, and how it might change at other times. And another really significant finding in this physical dimension was the impact of COVID-19 and lockdown on self-love. So this was something that hadn't really been explored in previous studies, despite them being conducted after 2020. So this finding found that some of the participants experienced this, COVID-19 as very difficult, as very painful and traumatic. And as we can see here in Ria's experience, for her, it was very, very difficult experiencing her first pregnancy during COVID, where she didn't feel that support. Things were very uncertain. She was at home. It felt really, really isolating and difficult. And some other participants, it was interesting that their experience was a bit different. They felt actually this was a time for transformation. It was a time for self-reflection. They were able to connect with people all over the world through online mediums. So it's really fascinating to see again how such, I guess, existential events that can happen. And I've used the term here specifically, vadya. So instead of using existential crisis, I've used existential vadya. And vadya translates to, again, a Sanskrit term, translates to whirlwind, chaos, and transformation all at the same time. So it really captures, I guess, that complexity of certain events in life. And then we've got here the physical and mental health as well, the impact of that, and then experiences of therapy and support as well. Um, and then we're moving on to the personal dimension. So this was here Pinjara and Azadi, which means cage and freedom. So finding the key in the cage. So I guess in this particular dimension, this was really speaking of, I guess, this metaphorical cage that sometimes the women were experiencing or feeling, that it almost feels like sometimes, they're in this, they're in this battle. They're almost in this battle. How do I grapple with this self-love? And it was really about searching for that self in self-love. So, really asking oneself. So Sabah here talks about, really engaging in those moments of solitude, being alone with the self, and really asking herself, what do I want? What is it that you want to do? Really checking in with that self. And then we've got Atma Shakti, which means inner power, inner self. This inner power that came about, despite being in this metaphorical cage at times, that sometimes the women were still able to try and step towards this inner power. And here talks about Sherni. Sherni in Punjabi means lioness. So this, inner Sherni would come out, and she felt this sudden courage to do all these things that she wanted to do. And authenticity was a huge part of self-love, so really stepping into this, this beautiful sense of authenticity, being able to decipher between what was inauthentic and what was authentic. And one of those elements was how the participants talked about being very selective about where they spent their energy on. They noticed that actually they need to the energy perhaps doesn't align so much with certain people, but that also came with difficulties, of course, especially being in collectivist cultures where there's often a sometimes, I guess, that underlying push to keep on to relationships, even if they're not serving you. So there was those sort of elements as well. And I think another beautiful part of this was Kyra, for example, she shared how, she was now looking at herself in the mirror, but almost, looking to herself for validation rather than looking to other people for validation. So that self-acceptance was almost coming in as well. Um, and I think it's really important to capture here the finding the key in the cage, that, this is really speaking quite volume on how complex self-love can be and how challenging self-love can be, that you can sometimes be in this challenging life experience, difficult life experience, but despite that, the woman here talked about how they were still trying to, I guess, reach that inner strength, that resilience, which they beautifully displayed. So that element there is really quite important as well. And then we've got here the social dimension here, which is the ancestral sanduk. Ancestral sanduk. So sanduk means box or chest, a bit like this image here. And it's often something that culturally gets passed on from generation to generation, and it can have all sorts of things in this box. You can have pictures in here, you can have different adornment pieces, so like jewelry, you could have bindi, you could have even clothes, saris, it could be anything. It's something that gets often passed down from generation to generation. But what was really fascinating in this theme was how the women were talking about some of the things that had been passed on from generation to generation. So the things like those intergenerational scripts of, well, you need to put your husband first, or, you can't put yourself first, those kind of thoughts that got passed on. But then what the women were also noticing and doing were actually starting to question certain beliefs that perhaps didn't align with them, but not just questioning beliefs, but also holding on to their cultural roots that did align with them and that did resonate with them as well. So again, this paradox, but also, I guess what this theme shows is how, you can still hold, I guess, to some degree, that power to be able to decide what you now want to put in this ancestral sanduk. So, for example, one of the things that really came up was that some of the participants were talking about how they really wanted to teach their children and future children about the importance of self-love from an early age, something that they didn't quite experience growing up, but they wanted to make sure that they shared that on to their children, but not just their children. What they noticed was not just the future generation was being impacted by their self-love journey, but they noticed the former generation. So their mothers, for example, they were also starting to now learn and think, oh, okay, maybe I can put myself first. And actually, it's okay for me to absolutely engage in self-love in whichever way that might look like. So that was quite a beautiful, I guess, depiction of how, self-love can touch not just the self's life, but other people's lives as well. So yeah, these were some of the themes in here. And then we've got the spiritual dimension, which was rooted in mud and rising as a lotus. So this really talked about the various different spiritual aspects of self-love. And again, this was something that hadn't really been explored in previous studies. The spiritual aspects, I guess, of self-love. So again, we've got so many different sub-themes, and I'm just mindful of time because I do want to make some space for our discussion as well. So, and we can come back to some of these as well. But I just, wanted to kind of draw attention, I guess, to just how varied and wide these range of experiences were. Like the power of manifestation in self-love, the power of intuition, really listening to that intuition, that inner voice within you. And then we've got the final theme here, which was the interwoven dimension, the constellation of self-love. So how self-love, sort of came together, but how it sort of how it was interwoven throughout all these other various different dimensions. So we've got the emotions here. So one of the key emotions in self-love that came up was happiness and peace, which is sukh and sukoon. And the emotions of self-love, the childhood trauma in self-love, but also the language and expression, this difficulty in expressing self-love. What does this term really mean? So all of these aspects were actually happening as well. Social media, the impact of social media, but these myths and barriers within self-love as well. And here I've got some found poetry by some of the participants that was really beautifully shared and captured. And I just want to read a few lines. So Kyra here said, "You breathed it, you lived it, you lived you. With you, through you, and through others, you are a warrior. If you can't trust others, then trust yourself." Um, and we've got here as well that, shared her beautiful take on self-love as well. And it was really important for me to wanting to capture, I guess, um, the raw experiences of self-love in the words of the participants as well. And these were some of the core essence, I guess, of my main findings. So really understanding that there is an implicit and explicit impact of trauma on self-love. This ancestral sanduk, this sense of being able to think about what gets sometimes passed on in terms of generationally, but what can be added and perhaps taken out as well. And the fact that this self-love is a continual journey in relationship with the self. And a bit like this maze here, that it's deeply complex and it takes time to sometimes understand and grapple with. So the findings really did show that self-love was very relevant on all of these dimensions, that it does exist on all of those dimensions. It is deeply complex and multi-layered. It has a lot of different tensions and paradoxes. And it is a deeply emotional experience. And it is impacted by time and space as well. And in terms of the cultural metaphors and I guess culturally attuned language, I really wanted to bring in and introduce non-Westernized terms to really help capture self-love and express how self-love can be seen in different ways, and to really capture this sort of deeply multi-layered experience of self-love as well. So yeah, just again, just giving an overview here. So one thing I really want to draw attention to in this slide is the self-related concept. So what I also did was in the narratives, I looked out for other self-related concepts because I really wanted to understand, okay, we've got self-love, but we've also got these other self-love related terms. What is the impact of them on self-love? And what the research showed that, yes, that there is a need and it can be very helpful and important to include other self-related concepts like self-compassion, self-acceptance. But what I guess this research is also talking about is understanding where they are also different and where they also merge together as well. And in terms of my discussion, so strengths and limitations. So I guess in terms of the main strengths was that this study really did explore the rich lived experiences of self-love and the barriers. It really helped place the participants as the real experts on self-love. And it really allowed to uncover, I guess, the deep complexity and multi-layers of self-love. And also in terms of the researcher myself, I was able to really, use that use of self, but also engage in that creative reflexivity. And in terms of limitations, it's quite a relatively small sample. I would have loved to have interviewed much more people, and also interviewed people perhaps in, even exploring different languages and different genders and age groups, because this exists on so many levels. My impact of being an insider researcher, I think that can be both sometimes an advantage, but it might have had some disadvantages as well. And yeah, I would have loved to have also conducted follow-up interviews of self-love, because it is such a fluid and evolving topic. So that would have been a really fascinating thing to have done. So yeah, just this was some of my original contributions. So novel findings, having that existential lens, having that creative reflexivity, using those multiple lenses, and using SEA creatively, looking at those barriers, including those cultural metaphors, and really going beyond categorizing self-love. And a bit like this image here, really unpacking it and being aware that, maybe it is just complex, and that actually that's what we're sitting with. We're sitting with that complexity. and understanding it for ourselves and merging this self-love with collective love as well. And in terms of conclusion, I would say that this really is here an invitation for therapists or anyone exploring self-love, but explore that from a very existential, phenomenological lens. And what I mean by that is to really go beyond just summarizing something or trying to analyze something or being quick to define something. Let's sit with that complexity. Let's describe it fully. Let's unpack it, and not just with clients or people you might be working with or anyone that you might be talking about it with, but really for yourself as well. Can we make space for it in supervision as well? And to understand the barriers to self-love and the access to therapy and the cultural nuances as well. How can we sort of move beyond a pathologizing stance and actually really meet with self-love with where people are at? And to really give self-love this dedicated space and identity within counseling psychology, which I think is really important because it hasn't received that till date. And this is just a few of my thoughts about self-love. So I really feel that self-love is loving yourself. It's unique, and an important relationship with yourself. And this can mean very different things for everyone. And at times, self-love can feel like a little bit of a dance between the absence and presence of self-love and those liminal spaces in between those states as well, but also the liminal spaces in between your various selves that you're meeting along the way and in your journey. And something else that I feel is very important and a reminder is that self-love is not the same or is not narcissism or selfishness. In fact, it's very important to love yourself. Although, I acknowledge it can be very difficult and challenging. And finally, I just want to end here on saying a very, very big thank you to the collective that has been part of this beautiful journey, to all the wonderful and amazing, inspiring participants, my dream team, my supervisors, university admin team, tutors, clinical supervisors, and so many other people. And a very special thank you to God, universe, my beautiful mother, my amazing, beautiful family, ancestors, friends, for all your amazing unconditional love and support. And I genuinely say this, that without all of you, this project just wouldn't have not been possible. So I'm very, very thankful to you all. And I'm very thankful to you all for listening. Thank you so much.
Oh, Kavita, you're a work of art and your presentation is a work of art and your thesis as well. You took the idea of it being creative and you ran with it, and I absolutely love you for that. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared tonight. It's such a gift. It really is. It really, really is. And I we've got, about 15 minutes that we can have a discussion. I'm gonna do something I don't usually do and jump in myself here, which is a bit cheeky. But I think you actually kind of almost concluded at one of the most significant things that comes up for me in my conversations with clients, in conversations with friends, this idea that self-love is an act of selfishness, that completely warped view of what it means to be kind and loving towards ourselves. And I love that you have really emphasized the role of our past, emphasized the role of what we've inherited, the traumas, this idea of giving so much to others becoming our way of navigating the world, that the idea of even considering letting ourselves receive something from ourselves or from others and loving ourselves becomes so discombobulating, so something that we feel so guilty at the even idea of, let alone bringing that into action. And so I would just love if you wanted to share a little bit more about why you have found it important to emphasize that self-love is not selfish.
Mhm. Thank you so much. I think it's so important to, yeah, really draw attention to this and unpack this, because um often I might sometimes, hear, or, often this thing of, well, if I love myself, then that means I don't care about others, or I don't love them. And if we look at this, from a collectivist cultural perspective as well, I think some of the challenges that the participants were talking about was this grappling with, well, if I choose myself in this particular thing, that means I'm not respecting or choosing my family, and my family mean a lot to me. I still love them. So I guess it was this grappling as well, between really trying to understand, that that self-love is doesn't mean that it takes away the love that you give to others. You can still love yourself. And in fact, when you're loving yourself and you're in that beautiful state of loving yourself, that love naturally will flow out to other people. Um, so I think that was one of the key aspects of why I really wanted to, I guess share that, and often that belief of it being either narcissist or being selfish. And I really pray for a day when we don't have to say the word self-love and selfishness and narcissist in one sentence. I really pray for that day, because it almost feels like each time I say it, I almost have to defend it straight away, or have to quickly clarify it, because of how deeply embedded this thinking has been. Um, but they are completely different concepts. To love yourself is it's a relationship that you're having with yourself. If we can extend that love towards others, it's a bit like Eric Fromm's quote, if I need to love others, then surely I need to love myself as well. Love others as human. I need to love myself because I'm also human. Yeah.
It's so beautiful the way that you put that, and that word abundance comes from me. It's this idea that we're not limited in the amount that we love, and so we can still continue to share our love with others, but that doesn't mean that we can't also equally love ourselves. And it makes me want to read a comment from Lisa, who had to go, but she's said, thank you so much, Kavita, for your work. I've been working on my healing and self-love after a lifetime of absence of self, from trauma and intergenerational trauma, existing only in care for others, which I think is what we were speaking to, or you were speaking to here. And it really stands out, this idea that there's been an an absence of self as a result of trauma, an absence of self as a result of an absence of self-love. And is that something that you've noticed, that people can lose themselves if they are in environments that are traumatic, or almost stealing that love from the world, and sharing bitterness towards them rather than the love that they're truly deserving and needing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why it just makes me think about that theme that I shared, which was finding the self in self-love. And something I want to add to that is as well is finding the love in self-love as well. Because sometimes, we see that term as self-love, and it just, but it doesn't sometimes quickly make you, I guess, understand that you're essentially, it's a very big task, of course, and it sometimes takes a lifelong. You are searching yourself, you're getting to know yourself, you're trying to understand what yourself needs, and trying to extend whatever form of love that you're able to give, but also understanding times when you're not able to give that love, to be really, thinking about that from a phenomenological perspective, to be really, I guess, curious about that, open about that, think about what is that trying to teach me? I wonder what's going on for me, that I'm not feeling that sense of love to myself, but yet I'm able to readily give it towards others. I wonder what's that about, what's going on there for me. And that's why it's really important. And I say that's why it's important, I guess, to move beyond just looking at definitions that you might see sometimes in certain literature, books, or online. I mean, they can be helpful and they can be a great start, but essentially, I want you to be able to feel and open that possibility to defining self-love for yourself. as sometimes that can be quite daunting as well. But really going deep within yourself and thinking, actually, what does loving myself look like for me? And maybe that might even seem like such a foreign concept because it might be like, I've not even done this before. This is I don't know how to begin. Where do I go? Um, but it's just that taking that step towards recognizing that it is a journey, and it's okay for it to not suddenly come up for you. You might not get that sudden answer. Sometimes it comes to you at the most unexpected moment as well. Yeah.
And we've proved that me and you can speak about self-love for hours and hours over the last 3 years. But I want to just offer anybody else in the audience here today, if you had any thoughts or questions that you wanted to share, please feel free to.
I had a thought. Thank you so much, Kavita. I really enjoyed this. I think it was just, well, I've got many thoughts. Let me just try and, but there was a quote, towards the end from one of your participants, and it said, I guess I was showing myself love, but I didn't know what that term was. And I think she summarized it so beautifully because when you were bringing in the terms, but then you had the Sanskrit words for them, I was like, this is amazing because it's a way for people to know that um, they've had it has been there all along. The option has been there all along, but sometimes it's just because it's contextualized in a very different way. So we think, oh, is that self-love? Because she was like, I didn't know what that term was, but I was doing it. Um, and then also what I really loved was the different ways that the participants were showing themselves love because they didn't fit under one umbrella. So it was really nice to just get those snapshots to see how, because it can act as a representation for other people that didn't know that they could just do those simple things to take care of themselves. And I was particularly drawn to the lady that said that getting out of the home is her form of self-care and self-love and what that might mean on so many layers. So yeah, I just loved it overall, and I really hope that in terms of dissemination, it can get out there so that other people can experience that and look at self-love, self-care through a different lens because there's so much richness, especially in those terms that you formulated as a result of what you had kind of broken down in your research. And I think, yes, it can contribute to the cultural context that you're working with, but all other cultural contexts and across the board. So, yeah, that was it from me.
Thank you so much, Shiva. That's really kind of you. And I think that was really beautifully captured in terms of how sometimes um one person could be doing self-love or engaging in self-love, but yet not know that it was because firstly, sometimes there might not even be a clarity on really what that term really means. And I think this is why I think social media is interesting as well. And I think that paradox did come up as well, where some participants had found it very, very helpful in their self-love journey, but others have found it very difficult because it almost made this sense of, oh, this heightened this sense of comparison, that maybe I'm not doing enough, or perhaps this is what self-love should look like, because it has, social media can be so powerful as well, and the way it gets portrayed in this term. So yeah, I guess that's why I was in the beginning saying that, think about self-love. You might want to express it in a different way, a different word, and it might not even be a word. It might actually just be a feeling, or it might be a memory. It might be something. It's just in our culture we use this word called jazbat. Jazbat means just this inner feeling that you feel. It's just a knowing, and I guess it just needs to make sense to you because it's really about your that deeply personal journey with yourself.
Kavita, sorry, I'm not opening my cameras, Narisya.
Okay.
We happen to open our mics at the same time all the time.
I know.
Um, just very quickly, I think this is my self-love happening here because I'm not feeling I can come on the camera at the moment, but I didn't want to miss out because I've had a very long day and there is a history of chronic pain going on. So, but I still wanted to be here. So here I am. I think I just want to share, for me, self-love, the analogy that comes to mind is, you put your oxygen mask on first. I mean, that's the first thing. So if you can't show love to yourself, then how can you show love to anyone else in this world? And whatever you show, is that really love then? Or what is it that you're showing?
Mm.
So I think it's really important that we look at it the way you've looked at it, and also born and brought up in India, having someone talk in the language which is so familiar to me in this land, also felt really, what should I say, heartwarming and very
Oh,
nice that, hearing some of these words in these academic discourses, which, I have been missing a lot. And I'm hoping that maybe you've given me an idea. I'm just starting my research. I'm in year 3 now at
amazing.
NSPC. But who knows what concepts I might be using. But it's really nice that, to show that you can use these different cultural terms, and make them your own. And this is how you spread. What does it mean to have cultural sensitivity? It means to know more about the terms, or like the word you said, just bath, that you feel. You don't have really specific terms for it, but you feel, and those kind of things. And yeah, it's really very interesting, your research topic. At first I was like, self love, doing a dissertation. I was really intrigued. What are you looking at? What could it mean, really? And then when I sat through your presentation, I was like, oh my God. I mean, it, and the way you presented your slides, I think I just loved it, and the way you've expressed, and the whole dissertation in less than an hour, explaining it so clearly and in such an interesting fashion. So really very well done. And I I loved it. I absolutely loved every bit of it. So, and Narissia, I want to thank, because last moment, like 5 minutes ago, before the event started, she sent me the link, and I was like, yes, 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 I'm coming, I'm coming. So thanks, Narissia, for poking me. Well,
Oh,
that is me. Thank you so much for your presentation, Kavita.
thank you so much, Pallavi. That's really honestly means so much to me. Thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm so happy that you were able to, make this space and you felt you could connect with that, with, I guess, with the language that is, it's so important, isn't it? Because language is so, there's so many languages that I feel, it needs that representation. Otherwise, we just become confined to just certain language that it doesn't always connect or capture that depth. So yeah, I'm really, thank you so much for your kind words.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was gonna.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go.
Natalie.
I was just
Yeah,
gonna say, we're towards the end of the time now, but I'm more than happy to keep the space open, if for those who are able to stay. So go for
okay.
it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. There's so many different aspects of it. I think majority, whoever has spoken, you've kind of touched on it, or you've given it in your feedback. But yeah, the language is so powerful because, as you know, the language that you speak, it has different connotations, it has different energies,
Yeah.
separate than the English language that we use. And also with the English language, as you said in the beginning, there's always a way like to define it and put it in a box as
Mm.
to what that looks like. But if you look at your reflexivity, that was a great slide around all the things that you did through your reflexive process. So it wasn't just about journaling. And you said about, you went to the museum and you went back 4 times. So it was almost like you were re-experiencing
Mm.
whatever it was that was coming up for you. And is that defining a form of love, or a form of embodiment of that experience that was giving you that feedback? That's what was coming up for me. But I just felt that it was really great, actually, seeing that on the screen, all the things that you did as a reflexive process, and how that was gearing you towards work, doing the research and coming to these kind of themes about how it was being processed, because I just got a sense that it wasn't just the words, it was actually the motion. It's around the phenomena, as you were saying, it was around the phenomena of what was happening and giving yourself permission to feel, it, like to embody and just embrace it. So there was a lot of, I think what came up for me was self-love as a way to redefine your whole self separately from, when you spoke about what you went through as a child. So it's almost like redefine, it's like an act of resistance. Like, I'm not going to be that object my culture or my community is saying that I have to be. So let me redefine love and experience it as I want to. And that came through quite powerfully, I think, for me anyway. And I love the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
The fact that you actually use the Taj Mahal was like, hmm. So that was really, really nice, I thought. And, the image around it being, you didn't even notice it, that it was slightly broken, you know, and just the whole thing, just the whole thing that it's been there how many hundreds of years now? And the history behind the Taj Mahal, am I saying it correctly? The
Yes.
whole history behind it and what it actually represents. So I think that was beautifully done. And I love the slides. And even though it was very traditionally, some people might say it's very good, it wasn't. It was very strong. I felt there was something quite, well, for me, it was quite strong and quite powerful in how it was done. And I love the existential framing of it as well, because it gives it so much more depth and context that it does and it actually speaks that you can't pigeonhole this in a box, and it can have different languages. So I thought it was really nice.
Oh, thank you so much, Narisha, for your really, really kind comments. And something that was coming up for me was just thinking back to this research journey, that for me, this topic, it didn't feel like a research topic. This was a spiritual journey. This is what it felt. This was something, like I've told Natalie this so many times, the amount of crazy, realizations I'm getting at the most crazy times of the day. And I could be going somewhere and I was just like, I need to write this down. I need to write this down, or I need to, it was like something that I've never experienced in my life before. And I truly feel so blessed to God, to the universe, for making me aware of this that I could do this as a research, and that I could have this beautiful privilege. I think it's a real privilege, real privilege to be able to explore something like this, and then also have my own self-love journey alongside it, but also be deeply inspired by the wonderful women in this study. And I'm still learning so much about it. I feel like there's so much to learn about self-love, and I just want to share this with anyone that is, for all that you are on your journey and your research, just, you know, don't be afraid to listen to that inner voice, because sometimes I think we can get, this academic world, it can get so evidence-based academia, doing things by the book, but actually just being able to listen to your gut instincts, that's also part of you're being guided in some way, I feel. So just listening to that, and sometimes really trusting that, I think, is really important. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Can I just say something on that? So what you said is so profound, because I felt that the way you were able to present your findings was like a philosophical meeting, um, because you were framing the structural extension analysis, etc., but it just made sense. You brought to life concepts, but it was co-created with yourself and the participants, and it spoke to the philosophy that we've always known and been presented with. So that trusting your gut and yourself, and letting the journey, having more of a peripheral view of the journey, like I experienced that in your presentation. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And to add to Sheba, we forgot to say, what you've also done, you've centered Asian voices. So you've centered women who are not typically heard in this context through their own phenomena of being, Indian or British Indian, and what that looks like for them and how that turns up. So there's a whole new narrative around something that's not typically centered.
Yeah.
That be, I can see this developing into other areas as well.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. Yeah, I think something I was just saying as well to Natalie was just how, because of how universal this topic is, I was just like, gosh, I'd love to almost do, like, just thinking about it now, like a world tour of how self-love is experienced and understood, and in the language, in the language that people feel comfortable to, just to be, I might not understand it, but that's why I went back to that word just birth. Just birth means that unsaid connection, that connection that sometimes doesn't need those translators, but just a human translation that we sometimes forget. Yeah, I just thought, gosh, wow, imagine how much more would be revealed about self-love around the world. Just would be fascinating. Yeah.
Well, on that note, watch this space, because as I had expected, this would be a very, very inspiring conversation. And I know you three in particular, that you could talk about this for a very, very long time. And essentially, you've already been talking via me through this for some time now. So I'm so happy that you guys are connected, and that hopefully this conversation between you will continue. But as we know, we're also here in a much wider space today, and I hope that the conversation that you have brought to us today will inspire other people to bring that conversation continually in relation to themselves, and also into relation to their community and to the universe that they're inhabiting as well. So this is, as many of people are saying, super pioneering, super inspiring, super duper. Kavita, it's been such a special moment to share together. It will be the first, but I very much hope not the last. And I really, really can't wait for us all to reconnect whenever that might be. So thank you, everybody here, everybody that chose to listen later. And Kavita, a massive thank you to you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much to
you.
you all.
Thanks.
Thank you.